Hey, friends, family, and neighbors, I'm locked down here in Coronaville with nothing but my records. David Thomas Roberts' first record, Music for a Pretty Baby, and Trevor Kitchener, Days Beyond Recall. Those records are hard to find. I left Hawaii in 1964. It's just about time for a return visit, I think. With that in mind, I got my favorite Aloha shirt on. At least my favorite that still fits. And I got my Corona cut. I think I'm ready to travel. Hey, vinyl community, and welcome YouTubers from everywhere. Yeah, that little 47-second intro you saw there, I did that a couple weeks ago for my Facebook page. Now, I generally don't do much vinyl community stuff on Facebook, but I thought, hey, maybe you guys would like to see that, and it made a good intro. I got some VCLT from my old buddy Dean DeBone. Now, Stan Kenton plays Chicago. This record's a surprise. It's not what you would think it is, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this record and a little bit more about Stan Kenton. Kind of a big band, lots of people in it. Real nice gatefold, inner sleeve. This is on Creative World Records. I was not familiar with that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. Here is the record label. So let's talk a little bit about Stan Kenton and a little bit about this record, which is a great sounding record, by the way. Stan Kenton, he's one of those very common names. He made a ton of records. Born in 1911, had his first band in 1941, and was continuously productive up until his death in 1979. Quite interesting person. He was a pianist, which I'm not sure if I ever knew that. Was a band leader, an arranger, a teacher, and a quite interesting person. I'll just read a little brief thing that somebody wrote, which I thought was interesting. There have been few jazz musicians as consistently controversial as Stan Kenton, dismissed by purists of various genres while loved by many others. Kenton ranks up there with Chet Baker and Sun Ra. Yeah. As jazz's top cult figure, he led a succession of highly original bands that often emphasize emotion, power, and advanced harmonies over swing. And this upset listeners who felt that all big bands should aim to sound like Count Basie. Kenton always had a different vision. Stan Kenton plays Chicago. You might think this is a live recording from Chicago. That's what I thought at first, but if you look up closer there, I showed that earlier. What does it say? Play Chicago. He's talking about the band Chicago on the first side of the record. So doing some covers with his arrangements of those tunes, and on the second side, the music from Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So this record was talking about trying to get people that thought the big band stuff was all old-fashioned to play some of what was popular in the pop music, we might say rock and roll, of the time, and he was in this kind of stuff for a long period of time. This is a big band. There's lots of instruments here. I'll tell you just a little bit about this. This was recorded at Universal Studios in Chicago, Illinois, and it was 1974. It was recorded on the Ampex 16-track tape. The information here, which I know you can't see, tells about the microphones used on every instrument. So you want to know what mics they had on the piano, it will tell you here. And a lot of information here about the recording and what they were trying to do. Dean sent this to me as a great sounding record. This is one of those records when you put it on, you got music all across, you really have three-dimensional, the instruments are separated around. There's a lot of them, maybe reminds you a little bit of like the Command records, but this is later technology, and so the sound is just phenomenal. The pressing is good. This is done on his own label, which in the early 70s, he had been at Capitol forever. He lost that contract. He started this label to issue his new records, and he issued a bunch of his old records on there. So there's not hardly any names on here you would recognize, because in the later period, keeping a band like this going was expensive, and so he had a lot of young musicians, which were all quite good. But, you can't have a group like this when rock and roll's taken over everything, full of top-notch musicians. But the music was outstanding. The fidelity of this record was outstanding. Now, I don't think this record is common, but it's not expensive. You can pick up a good copy for not more than a few dollars, I think, on Discogs, and probably the kind of record you could find in the dollar bins, that kind of thing. So keep out for it. Now, I mentioned harmonies, unusual harmonies earlier. Now, he, at this period in his life, he said what he was doing was progressive jazz. So this is nothing like the big band from the 1940s or the 1950s. He's using some modern harmonies, some progressive jazz, and he's doing the music of Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Put a little more time into this one record than usual, because I think this is a record that practically everybody in the vinyl community would probably just pass over, see it, whatever, whether it was $1 or $5 or $10, not give it a second thought unless you were a fan of his. And this is a great sounding record. Thank you, Dean. I got several early Stan Kenton records in my collection, but this record caused me to dig in and learn a little bit more about it, and that's always what makes the music more interesting. VCLT from Loretta, known in the vinyl community as Rock Chica, I'll leave a link down below, known as Mr. Cheesecake in the vinyl community. She sent me a set of playing cards, I'd say from the 1950s Cheesecakey. We see lots of boobs here. I used that in my thumbnail with a little bleep on it, and you see how big these cards are. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but this is something that's fun to have, and it just fits in the Cheesecake collection. Thank you, Loretta. My favorite records, Rycooter Jazz. Yes, I have the OG of this that I purchased when the record come out, but here recently, Speaker's Corner has reissued this record, remastered from the original tapes, pressed on high-quality vinyl, and this record right in the middle of my sweet spot. Not going to go on about this, but all of the music before 1930, a good amount of it before 1920, and so if you have any interest in this, these are about $30 now. Grab them. They're not going to be around about this long. And in the 70s, MoFi reissued this original master recording. There are 6 copies of that for sale on Discogs, and the cheapest one's $100. My guess is, without having that to compare to, this is probably the best sounding version by far. So just a little heads up if you have any interest. And over at Noble Records here a couple weeks ago, he put up a video called 20 Records You Have to Hear. I'm always interested in those things. It was quite good, and the record he showed, because it's a rare one if you get the OG of this, Karen Dalton, it's so hard to tell who's going to love you the best. Boy, ain't that true. And this is a Light in the Attic Records version that I got from Grimey's in Nashville. And a shout out to Grimey's. A lot of times I get records here on the West Coast from back east. They take 2 weeks to get here. I ordered this darn thing and it showed up in 3 or 4 days. So they got this thing out quick. Didn't know anything about Karen Dalton, never heard about her. You can go check that out. She was an interesting person, but on this record, we go to side 1, tune 2, Sweet Substitute, Jelly Roll Morton, one of my all-time favorites. Well, you got my interest now. Even a Light in the Attic, because this is a rare record. This record was about $80, and to me, it's worth it. And if you have, the originals are probably $300 or $400 and up if you wanted one of those. I think 2009 was when this was reissued, so it hadn't been a while. Now, Her next record has been reissued, and you better grab this one if you have any interest. So this is a new one, Karen Dalton, In My Own Time, 1971 acid folk masterpiece, and this is on the Light in the Attic label. Haven't listened to this one yet. I've checked all these out on YouTube, so you'd think with this lockdown that I would be catching up on my record listening, but nope, I've been out doing quite a bit of stuff, so I'm just kind of staying even with the record listening, but it is fun to find out about new artists. Karen Dalton. I say keep 'em spinning and see you all down the trail, which are open either now or soon.
Happy trails to you until